This morning, I had the opportunity to revisit actually one of my favorite sacred texts in the Christian tradition. And as I said it, it landed upon my person in a way that I knew I'd be coming here and sharing my thoughts. I love this photo of me because in some ways it's the me I would want to be. I want to be a little bit more carefree than I am. I want to be a little less melancholy than I can be. I want to have this funny, quirky side of me, and yet there are times where I feel embarrassed by those components of me. But I start this slideshow with this picture because this picture is a huge part of me. A part of me that I don't always give voice to. A couple weeks ago, maybe even less time than that, I did this collage. I was working on these courses in this book about timelines and collages and spiritual autobiography, and I just thought, I want to see a picture of myself through the years. And so I created this, and in so doing, I saw many different versions of me. Has that happened for you? When you look down the road of where you've been, can you see the chapters and pages of your life? And when you look forward, what is it that you think you're going to see? In these last couple of days and weeks, in this last month, I don't know if it was coming down with COVID or just everything going on in our world, or the fact that I just had a lot of time on my hands. And in so doing, I was creating, I was revisiting, I was looking forward and asking myself those kinds of questions that one asks themselves when there's a pause in life or when situations and circumstances are pressing in. I want you to pause, and I want you to think about for a moment where you've been, what you're looking forward to, and where you are. I want to ask this question. What are you searching for? What questions are you asking? I love Rilke's poems to a young poet, or letters to a young poet. I love that he calls us to live the questions. And one thing that I have found of myself is that in every space, whoever I was, in whichever page or chapter I was in, what I can say congruent about myself amidst all the shifts and changes is my pursuit of living wholehearted. This picture is so meaningful to me in that I love that nature can create such things. I found a leaf in the shape of a heart the other day on the pavement, and it just spoke to me. But one of the things that I've really desired to not have is a hard heart. And the fact is, I have at times had a really hard heart. And in the seasons of deconstruction and in the seasons of questioning, I had anger and I had resentment and I had bitterness and even confusion. And sometimes when all of that comes together, there can be fear. Most often there's fear of the unknown, fear of there was so much coming into my life that I never saw coming. And in that, it changed me. And in that, of decades of being in a very specific construct in faith tradition, I witnessed humanity sometimes at its lowest spaces. I witnessed ego, and I witnessed dogma. And for me, that landed upon my person, and I allowed it to contort my being. There were some spaces I wanted to belong into, and I was willing to shave off parts of me in order to belong. And there were some points in my life where I didn't ask enough questions, or I didn't have the courage or internal wherewithal to stand my ground, and I conceded ground. There's a sculpture that I love, and it's about grief, and it's about love, and it stands there with a hole in the core of our being, in the center of ourself. And while not the artist's interpretation, the other day I was seeing this picture and sculptures like it with different missing body parts. And I knew in that moment, for me, what I was being asked to consider as someone who takes a contemplative approach to spirituality, but has an anchoring more in the Judeo-Christian tradition and a heart affection and love for the man of Jesus Christ and that story of his walk on the earth and the way he related to humanity. In those places, in what reverberates within me, I heard the sacred text about I can't say to the hand in relationship to the quote-unquote body of Christ or the totality of humanity and spirituality of believers, I can't say to the hand, I don't need you. And yet, as I've watched my own deconstruction of faith, and then even went from a conservative ideological theological grid in evangelicalism to a more progressive stance, what ended up happening more than anything for me is I took off labels. I would no longer consider myself an evangelical, but no more than I would consider myself, my theology, or my ideology conservative. I also wouldn't call myself liberal or progressive. What I would say about myself is I love the way it's written of the stories of Jesus as he walked on the earth. I love the way he dealt with power. I love the way he dealt with the religious of his day. I love how he masterfully walked through times of trickery and came out the other side. I love how when the people wanted to make him king, he got away from the crowds. I wish I knew more quote-unquote gurus, pastors, leaders who had that same heart. I don't follow a theological strand. I follow a heartbeat. And in so doing this morning, when I came back to a favorite text of mine, it landed powerfully, especially given the fact of the days that we're living in. Especially as we watch the election roll out throughout the days in this country, and the ideology and theology and the vast differences that exist amongst us. At the end of the Gospel of John, there are these verses that have been very meaningful to me. It's a dialogue between the disciple Peter and Jesus. And Peter, after hearing Jesus' call for Peter to follow Christ, Peter sees the disciple whom Jesus loved. And historically, that space has been given to John. And Peter, upon seeing him, said to Jesus, "Lord, and what about this man?" And Jesus said to him, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." And it's really fascinating. I love how it's recounted here in this story about how then all of those people thought that that disciple would not die. But that's not what Jesus said, is it? He did not say to him that he would not die, but only if I want him to remain until I come. What is that to you? And today, when I heard those words in my heart again, what is that to you? I thought about my more conservative, theological, ideological, I don't know to call them friends, but people I've known who are still much more conservative in their ideology and theology, who believe that sacred text says specific things about sexual orientation and different ways that we should live. I don't understand those constructs. I've seen and studied original texts, and for me, understand the parameters of what it actually was saying. But what is it to me if someone chooses differently? You see, having had COVID, not feeling well, feeling tired, having lots of space to think, I have thought more about the human being I want to be, the spiritual being I want to be. The call of sacred text to even love my enemy. That what is it accredited to me if I love only those that are like me? You see, and it's this call that I don't hear coming from either side. Not the progressives, not the conservatives. I don't hear this message enough that truly, as a spiritual being, it is my call to love. What is it to me truly if someone believes something different? What am I called to do? How am I called to follow? And that's gotten clearer and clearer. For me, I understand that the call to walk and love the divine being and to be a spiritual being, I am called to love justice for all. I am called to be merciful, and I am called to walk humbly. It's clear to me that in the passages of the true fast in Isaiah, that prayers will fall to the ground if we aren't taking care of the most vulnerable among us. For me, I see a ringing in the heartbeat of the divine nature that calls me forward. Me forward. But it's not for me to judge another's belief. I'm not their judge and jury. It is for me to go and live my life. And I can hold the beliefs that I hold, and I can have wonderment of how somebody can't love the foreigner and the immigrant, can't understand that universal health care for all is important, that taking care of the most vulnerable citizens is actually handing the least of these a cold cup of water. For me, there is an incredulousness about that. But even in those spaces of being incredulous, what is it to me? They won't answer to me. I don't answer to them. And I don't want to say I don't need you. They are my teachers. I spent a good portion of my young Christian faith walk in the Vineyard Christian Fellowship. And in it, I remember John Wimber. And I remember him talking about his detractors. And I remember him saying they kept him honest. Basil wants to chime in there. Truly, what is it to you? What is it to me? Our call is to love. And our call is to love, period. Not if someone has the same ideological grid, not if someone theologically agrees with us. Our call is to love and to not say to each other, you aren't needed. And so in that, I endeavor, whatever the results are for our country, I endeavor to hand a cold cup of water to the least of these. I endeavor to live my life in such a way that love seeps out of my pores. And not a loosey-goosey love, but a love that holds justice for all and mercy and walks humbly upon the earth. So this morning, when this text in John 21:21 came into my heart, it reminded me, what is it to me? Go and live my life. And that is what I intend to do on the road to 50.